Please reach out if you're interested in any presentation. We'll pass it over. But to keep things going and keep us a little bit on schedule, I now have the privilege of introducing Joanne Ford and Jamal Wilson, who will be speaking next. Oh, I'm sorry, Joanne, are you not getting up? Joanne's been a longtime advocate for AACA, so she deserves a shout out anyway.
I got it. Yeah. All right, good afternoon, everyone. As Rebecca said, I'm Jamal Wilson with the FAA Surveillance and Broadcast Services Office. And I am honored to be here with my teammates, Jane Lopez and Jimmy Wright, on the ADSB expansion team for Alaska. Very, very big project, very, very important project. So I wanted to take a few minutes. I know I'm the only thing standing between you guys and happy hour, so I promised 30 minutes or so, and we'll probably be done, and then we can adjourn to the bar to have good discussions afterwards. Fair enough? So with this briefing, the first thing I'd like to start with is just a general breakout of the systems and components. And you guys know this very well. There's a lot of pros in the room. You probably know ADSB just as good, if not better, than I do. But why do we start with this? Because we have to level set based on the environment that we're trying to expand, right? I live in DC. When you look at ADSB from an equipage standpoint, especially east of the Mississippi River, the amount of controlled airspace that you're looking at really affects your mindset when it relates to equipage. I live in DC, and if I want to go visit my family up north, I traverse 4 different Mode C veils, and they're all attached to Core 15 airports that are pushing a lot of traffic. I didn't have a choice. If I want to continue to operate, I needed to equip, right? In Alaska, it's a little bit different because we show this to show the cooperative nature of the system. Long gone are the days where a radar has to interrogate you and then you give information back and ATC keeps track of you that way, right? ADSB as a cooperative system means that your airplanes are talking directly to each other. When you don't have a lot of radar capabilities in your state, when it becomes very, very important to make sure that those mid-air collisions, you try and mitigate and reduce that as much as possible, those airplanes talking directly to each other and providing you that traffic information so you can make good strategic decisions in terms of avoiding traffic, in terms of hyper-accurate GPS satellite positioning so you can avoid those CFIT instances by knowing exactly where you are. That's the type of consideration that we really like to remind folks here in the state to look at. So then it becomes 2 separate mindsets. You've got a lower 48 mentality, especially in populated areas. Now you've got the Alaska mentality where you're not equipping to take care of some type of regulatory requirement. You're equipping to take care of yourself and the other aviators that are around you, right? So we use that as a baseline to go into what the technology can do for you as a tool and as a service. I was just talking about airspace. When you look at this, as a general rule, everybody in this room is saying, I see Class A and I see Anchorage, and there's nothing else in Alaska. You're exactly right, which goes exactly back to my point from 30 seconds ago. When it's not airspace dependent, it is safety dependent. And the folks in Alaska really have to continue to remember that you're looking out for yourselves and each other with ADSB as a tool and a service. This is the issue that we're trying to expand. Everybody sees this, and we look at it 2 different ways. FAA looks at this, and we see the lines that divvy up the service volumes, which represent the 3-dimensional picture of an airspace in a particular area that we want to fill with ADSB. And you all see this and say, I see where I operate, I see where I'm safer, and I see where I'm not safer, because you can see where the coverage starts and stops, right? This is a well-known issue. We've been chasing this for years, and this is why we are where we are now with boots on the ground, trying to get additional GBTs into the NAS and into Alaska specifically. So we realize where, especially in some of the populated areas, you have Anchorage, lots of coverage in Juneau, but then as it goes to some of the less populated areas where it's a little bit harder to find infrastructure to co-locate with sites or find green sites for additional GBTs, then the research becomes a little bit more difficult, but it'll be that much more worthwhile when we get it done. So that is the map that we constantly refer to when we're trying to figure out how best to do this. ADS-B technology. This slide should really say, what do we get out of it? What do we in Alaska get out of this technology? I really like to focus on two bullets that might not get that much press here in the state because you don't associate any of the core 15 airports. It's not JFK. Alaska moves a lot of 10, but it's not JFK, it's not Miami, right? But when you talk about increased capacity and efficiency in the busiest airspace, I know for a fact that I can talk to anybody in here, and there's probably some routes that you're using, and there's a lot of airplanes occupying probably a couple of miles wide for Lord knows how many miles deep, right? There's a lot of airplanes and a very, very tight amount of airspace. And when you have ADS-B and those airplanes are talking to each other, I don't know if anybody's been to Oshkosh, but if you go to Mukau or any of the consolidation points, the airplanes that have ADS-B are sequencing themselves. ATC is not even talking to them. They're on the common frequency, they see the tail number, they see the direction they're coming from relative to themselves, and they're on the radios talking to each other. By the time they get to Mukau, there's a nice conga line, and they're doing it themselves with ADS-B. Just that alone always reminds me when I'm there, this is phenomenal because everybody has a responsibility now that they have this information to do the best they can with it. That's the whole compliance philosophy, right? And now they're using this tool so that everybody is safer. And that's just one example. And then you talk about yourself as a client aircraft when you have ADS-B and the service provision that comes with ADS-B in and the information that you can glean from there. So I really try and focus on those two things because busy airspace, as subjective a phrase as that is, it applies equally here as it does in the lower 48 because there's a lot of traffic, tiny bit of space. You're doing the same routes over and over again. It's very important to maintain that separation with ADS-B. Now we talk about what you get out of it. So when we were initially talking about ADS-B as a system, it was ADS-B out is the mandate, depending upon the airspace you're in. ADS-B in is the benefit, right? So back in the day when you were a big Part 121, you had a radar on your airplane, you can get a lot of that information. But the little guys, 91s, smaller 135 outfits, you were either reliant on somebody to provide you this information, or you just kind of had to roll your own and hope that the flight service report that you got before you took off held true your entire route, right? Now you have FSB coming to you. Here in Alaska, you have 15 products that are available to you for the entire purpose of giving you the opportunity to make better aeronautical decisions. That's going to affect you on the ground and in the air. So this list is our product summary of what you get. As I said before, these tools, as robust as they are, as much information as it provides you, we always highlight that it is an advisory service and it should not be used for tactical decision making. I say that because back in September of last year, and I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with this accident, but there was an accident in Kentucky where an instructor flew into a storm and he live streamed the entire event and was looking at the storm coming on ADS-B, commented on it on this video, and still flew into the storm, killed himself and the pilot, himself and the student. So he was using that information and he was making tactical decisions, trying to thread the needle, as we call it. All this information is only as good as the proper decision that you make with it. So we provide this and we say, use it the right way. Make smart, strategic aeronautical decisions so that you can be the safest operator you can be in your airspace. I just said what's on this slide. The only thing that I will add is if you look at a breakout of what those FSB products are, there's a decay rate that shows the amount of time that that information is refreshed in between. I think one of the biggest ones is regional NextRad, where you have a 15 to 20 minute delay. So that's why we say you shouldn't be using it to thread the needle because the eye of the needle is not going to be where you think it is because of that delay. But because you're all intelligent operators and you can recognize patterns, when you see what this weather is doing, you can still make a smart decision by saying, if I plan to be at waypoint A at time B, and this storm appears to be doing this over this period of time, I should reasonably assume that I should either adjust my departure time, adjust my route, or think about not going, right? So this is just a matter of using all your tools that the ADS-B in-feed is giving you to make proper decisions. So now we talk about rebroadcast. So anytime you have an airplane that is on one link and you have a single band ADS-B in receiver, rebroadcast gives you the opportunity to see that other aircraft by transferring UAT to 1090 and vice versa. We bring this up, but in the dual band ADS-B in receiver environment and how cheap they are to get, you really don't see a lot of rebroadcast necessity in the NAS because a lot of folks already have a dual band receiver in their window, whether it's a Scout or whatever, and they can already see 978 and 1090 in the cockpit. So the rebroadcast function exists for folks who may have a single band receiver. TSB. So this is a very, very important part of this briefing, and I'll tell you why. A few weeks ago, we participated in a FAST webinar. And in that webinar, towards the end, people were asking questions, and they were looking at what we were saying from a surveillance entirety perspective. ADS-B airplanes are talking directly to each other. And he said, well, I have a mode C transponder, so I can still be seen. I think I'm good to go. And that's partially true, because you're in Alaska. How many times have you seen a radar or been within radar range when you're out and about doing your business? And if you look, let me see. What's one of the main things that's important when you're doing that mode C service? You need a radar to ask the transponder a question so that you can respond, right? So when you have TSB and that mode C information is being fed to an ADS-B in capable aircraft, you have to remember, if you're not being interrogated and you're a mode C target, you think you're being seen, but you're just out there, right? So reminding people of that, and once he heard that, he said, oh, I forgot about the radar piece. He thought his mode C transponder was ADS-B. No, you're not giving us 1 second. You're giving us, what the interrogation tells it to give. So that is a very important consideration for folks who might be on the fence saying, I'm already with a transponder and people can see me. It depends on where you are. Because if you're not within radar range, then that transponder is not going to be given any information to an ADS-B in aircraft. So now we get to the difference between being what we call a client aircraft or an ADS-B out-equipped aircraft or a target aircraft. So when you're looking at TSB and ADSR traffic, what we do is we package the data and it gives a hockey puck around your aircraft as a centroid for the purpose of a more comprehensive traffic picture. Very, very important in this area when you're trying to figure out how many aircraft are around you, and if everybody was ADS-B equipped like you, that hockey puck would be a really comprehensive look at every aircraft that is going to try and avoid you because they have the same capability as you, we hope, and you're going to try and avoid them, right? And that TSB hockey puck is 3,500 feet above and below, 15 nautical mile radius. ADSR is 5,000 feet. Although anybody with an EFB will tell you that you typically see traffic way outside of that TSB hockey puck, but the hockey puck is what's most important because that's what's right by you. So when we say it gives you a more complete sight picture when you have ADS-B in, it doesn't take into account everything, especially in this area where you have Piper Cubs, anything without an electrical system. You might have some older aircraft, Stearmans that are flying during the summer when they can get out and do so. All those aircraft that aren't transmitting anything or that don't have a transponder, you still have a responsibility under Part 91 to see and avoid. So when we say that this is a more comprehensive sight picture, it is not a silver bullet that's going to show you absolutely everything that's in the air. Tethered balloons, those are objects to avoid as opposed to an aircraft to be surveilled. So all these things you have to take into account and not get lulled into a false sense of security with ADS-B that says, I'm seeing absolutely everything. You're seeing most of it, but still do your due diligence and make sure you get your eyes out to track targets that are not being presented on your EFB. Now we get to the meat of it. So I showed you the slide earlier that showed all the gaps in ADS-B coverage that we're trying to fill. So if you look, let me see here. Everywhere that there was a big gap, we have a GBT going in to provide coverage in that area to go to work on filling those gaps. And the whole purpose of that is, like I said, when we first deployed ADS-B and 9 out of the 14 Alaska service volumes got filled, the equipage at the time, because FAA was the one that took responsibility for equipping aircraft to participate in the infrastructure, and there just wasn't a benefit case for equipping everywhere, but now we're fixing that. So the plan is, because Alaska is an enormous state, the plan is a split deployment, split ISAT schedule. And ISAT is implementation site or service acceptance testing. So what that means is service volumes 325 and 326, which is everything that's south of Anchorage, the 4 sites south of Anchorage. We're working those right now so that we can get them finished and flight checked in the summer timeframe, and then get them fed to ZAN so they can use that to control traffic for IFR traffic right after that. And then for the other service volumes, everything, all the stars you see north of Anchorage, we're going to get those taken care of at the end of summer, and then work for a ISAT schedule in the November, December timeframe, depending upon how weather treats us, and then get that fed to ZAN immediately after. When looking at the amount of work and the amount of actual construction time that we have to do it, we've been at this for 2 years, but everybody knows we're here in Alaska. I've got 10 good months maybe of construction weather before we're froze out again. So the best that we could do in our minds was to split it up that way to give us the flexibility to do large bodies of work, get it checked, get it into ZAN so that it's available for their use to protect you, and then go back and do it again. And then one of the things that I will say here is the Indian Mountain site, which is a DoD long-range radar site, that is a recent addition to this slide, simply because we had a site selected that was an AT&T site, and they came not too long ago and said they were going to decommission that site. So these are the roles and punches of project and program management, right? No plan survives first contact. So when we heard that, we tried to find something else that was reasonably centered in that area that would provide an equal amount of service as Coldfoot Mountain without having to worry about a green site or spending millions of dollars leasing land and roughing it with infrastructure that wasn't there previously. When you're equipped, in the old days, you had a multi-transponder, it worked or it didn't work, and there was very little in between, right? If it didn't work, you're on your way to the maintenance facility to get it taken care of. With ADS-B, there's a little bit more to it than that. A lot of data points that are taken care of. As a matter of fact, Jimmy was talking to somebody earlier. Their ADS-B was working flawlessly with the exception of the flight ID piece. It was miskeyed and their tail number was not broadcasting correctly, and that was causing problems. But everything else, all the other parameters were working just fine. So what we tell people is you can go here to our website and check your performance as much as you want. It's a free service, and it allows you to look at the data bits that are being tracked, whether it's your navigation integrity or accuracy, your source integrity level. All these things are being looked at, and if any parameters are out of whack, then you can give us a call. You'll probably talk to Jimmy. He can walk you through how to fix it and keep your transponder humming. And like I said, it's a free service. What we try and remind people is if you're going to go do an annual, run your performance report right before the annual. So if there isn't any anomalies, you can take that to your mechanic, and while your bird is cracked open, they can take care of it for you. On our website for ADS-B, it's a one-stop shop. So if you're still on the fence about equipping and you're trying to figure out what is compatible with your bird, we have a tool that helps you with that, along with airspace maps. If you're interested in privacy information, we run a privacy ICAO address program so that you can run anonymized operations under an ICAO code that is owned by FAA and does not show up under your name in the registry. So if you got a fishing hole out there that you don't want anybody to know about and you don't want them to see you on any flight tracking sites, then it'll show up as surveillance and broadcast services in the registry, and they won't know who's going there to catch the 100-pound salmon, okay? And then if you ever have a need and your ADS-B is inoperative and you need to make it into Anchorage or some other airspace to get it fixed, we have a tool that's called ADAPT, which is an automated approval service for non-ADS-B equipped operations into ADS-B rural airspace. And the website will kind of walk you through what the criteria is for using that tool and steps for how to file a deviation authorization. So just a few questions to ask yourself, since we're a few years into the mandate already. And the reason why we ask these questions is because in the lower 48, and this isn't a comparison per se, because like we said before, there's not a lot of rural airspace here in Alaska, but in the lower 48, the equipage percentage is somewhere in the vicinity of 78%. If you look at Alaska, about a 25% equipage rate. The reason why I highlight that is when we think about what you can do as a community to be as safe as you can for yourself and each other, we really believe in the technology as it relates to leveraging the functionality to look after yourselves. So when you say, what is the benefit of having ADS-B? For me in the lower 48, I average 2 saves a year because I can see aircraft coming that meet all the criteria for a mid-air collision. No relative motion, same altitude. I narrated a mid-air with my wife because we saw it on the wingtip on ADS-B, visualized, got eyes on it, and descended 500 feet, and it was a Cessna 152, went right above us. You could see the map up in the window, and it would have been a mid-air because they weren't looking for anybody, and we wouldn't have seen them because in a low wing, they were right there on our wing. So that's 2 a year, and that's just for me, where it's relatively benign airspace. Features you enjoy the most, I mean, for me, between TSB and NexRad, it's life-saving stuff. And any stories on safety features. So think about these things, talk to your friends if they have ADS-B. When we're out on the road doing our outreach, it's to the point now where, because everybody travels in formation just like you're flying, so it'll be 4 people come up in formation, 3 people will have ADS-B, and there will be 1 individual who still doesn't. And they're tired of talking to their friend about trying to equip, so they bring them to us. Please help us, because we've tried to get him to equip, and he just won't do it. I don't understand. So think about what the technology can do for you. It's not about meeting a regulatory requirement. It is about taking care of yourselves and each other. So with that, I will stop and see if anybody has any questions that I can answer.
Since we're a few years into the ADS-B mandate, obviously there's probably quite a bit of data out there. Have you guys compiled any numbers on, what the accident, like mid-air rate is between aircraft that are equipped with ADS-B versus aircraft that aren't equipped with ADS-B, and what's that discrepancy?
It's not that it's a discrepancy, and sometimes the data is a little bit nebulous isn't the right word. For example, it's hard to compile that data quantitatively when you're looking like, for instance, in Alaska.
Right.
Just because of the equipage rate. But there has been other studies where there's a robust ADS-B infrastructure, both on the ground and in the air, and it's a noticeable increase in the drop. So, and those every quarter, we're looking at numbers that show both equipage, accident rates in certain locations. On the other hand, on the other side of that question though, when there is an accident and it's an ADS-B aircraft, we're looking very, very carefully at that, right? To say, was the technology being leveraged? What was going on there? So it's both sides. We look at the data for equipped and unequipped, and we're also looking at what happens in accidents and they are equipped. And that's just a continual data analysis.
Cool, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That 25% number that you put up there, can you break that down by 135 and 91? Because I know most of the 135 carriers that I deal with were all ADS-B in and out equipped.
So when I look at the data, I look at 1090, UAT, and dual. I can't get you that information if you want it though.
I'm just curious because one of the things we deal with the FAA, even in the FAA team, and one of the statements they made in that we aren't equipping, so they made that comment in the report, which was completely false because we all are equipped. So I just don't want that number to show that, hey, the people that are flying commercially up here are not equipped, and because it makes us look bad. Mm-hmm. And I'm guessing a lot of that's 91 flyers, Cubs and stuff that are up here. There's quite a few aircraft, but I'm pretty sure most of the 135s are equipped.
The thing about the data like that.
Yeah, and just to add to that, we just being on the East Ramp and living in the real world, a lot, like if that 25% does seem a little bit low, and if it is 91, there's a lot of 91 planes, if it's going by tail number or registration, I don't know, that never turn a blade, So anyway, just to be aware of.
No, so it's 25 because we wanted to round it, but it's actually closer to like 27% based on the 8,700 Alaska registered tails that you have here, give or take 50 or 60. And that number is based on that. And you're right. So we use ATAT data. And as soon as we see that first ADS-B blip pop up, we know that that aircraft is equipped. If somebody equipped and never turned a blade after that, I'm gonna question their sanity because that's just throwing money away, right? Not getting anything out of it. But we try and take those things into account when we're coming up with the numbers. And to your point about the 135, so those reports, oftentimes even we take them with a grain of salt in SBS when we're trying to look at the effectiveness of the technology. You'll have outfits that are west of the Mississippi River in the lower 48, and they might bounce from Class D to Class D running packages or people or whatever, never go above 10,000 feet, never talk to a controller except for the tower controller to Class D. They don't need ADS-B. So you might be getting on them for not equipping, but their use case just does not support equipage, right? So if we talk to them and we say, think about it from a safety perspective and what it can do for you, kind of like what I said to this group here, but that report would bash them for something that they have no regulatory requirement to equip with. So I say all that to say, sometimes these reports, you have to take them with a grain of salt because your use case may not support it. And if you equip in that vein, then you're doing it because you know that the technology can bring you something that is not required. Mr. Dyer. Yeah.
How's that?
There you go.
You knew I'd have a question.
Yeah.
I've got a couple. I think what you were saying is right about the fleet. There's some statistics out there, and I don't know if you guys have them or if I read them in a separate study, but the Part 135s are equipped differently than the Part 91s. It's just exactly the way you said it. And you know, this is where my goat's tied. The 9 sites. What do you think, how do you handicap the chances that next year when we're sitting here in this room, all 9 of those sites will be up and operational?
So if you were sitting next to me today, when I was on the computer, we're working furiously to keep this thing on track.
Right.
And by and large, it's working. The service provider is on board. Our partners here on the ground are on board. We're just working very hard at it. And in much the same way that if I asked the operators here, if you had 100 ops scheduled and you only flew 75 of them, and I asked you why, you say, oh, well, weather got us here, maintenance got us here, we had crew issues here. It just kind of is what it is, but you battle against it, right? We're doing the same thing. So my confidence is really high just because I know how hard we're working to get the stuff done. You know, we've got boots on the ground at locations already, equipment's being shipped to different places. So we are in actually a kind of 180-degree out of phase situation with this project, because a lot of projects will have grandiose visions and no money to implement. We've got money. It's just a matter of aligning schedules and letting the weather cooperate so we can get there and get stuff done. So that's actually a good position to be in if you have a problem, and that's what we're working with.
Great, thanks. And then just one more question. On one of your slides, you were talking about the FISB and the NexRad feed and the decay, the age. Now, isn't that because of the NexRad spin rate? It's not, I mean, FISB is plenty fast. There's no lag time there, right?
It's a matter of the amount of time it takes to package that much data and then get it up on the 978 feed to an aircraft. And I'm not a software engineer. I know it's gigabytes and then megabytes or terabytes or whatever. I don't know what the one is above that, but there's so much data, even on the regional side, and getting that from the National Weather Service, packaging it and getting it up on the 978 data stream, it takes a while.
Okay,
And
thanks.
that's the reason for that refresh rate being what it is.
Thank you.
Vince.
Also, just to add to that, the NexRad itself is a pencil beam. So it's not like an ATC radar that's pretty much up to
It's a
20
fan,
degrees,
right?
makes one sweep, gets everything. That NexRad has to spin, and it starts low and goes high. And so it takes a while for the radar itself to get a picture, and then you got to transmit.
Anybody else?
So just a thought for the Part 91 folks, and of course that's not here, but you know, the cost of ADS-B, the biggest cost is that display. And you know, Part 91 guy doesn't have to install that display. Most of the 135s should get caught in the regulatory requirements. So a handheld display and a handheld receiver on the glare shield works.
For in, right.
Part 91. In, yes. You still got to have the out, but the out you can do relatively inexpensively with one of these tail beacons or a wing beacon. You know, they work.
Rule of thumb that I've seen, oh, go ahead, Jimmy. What'd you say, Jimmy?
Okay,
I didn't want to get into that here, but
but,
the rule of thumb that I've seen is if you swag 10% of your aircraft's value for a fairly robust ADS-B out setup, and that's including the mechanics putting it in. You buy the box and you put it in. That's a fairly decent swag. But that's even kind of going down now that there's more options out there, and the market's kind of driving the price down a little bit, which is a good thing. Anybody else? All right, I'll meet you in the bar.
Okay, thank you. Ooh, that's loud. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time today.